Greetings friends, my name is Lemming and welcome to my new series Late to the Party, where I look at games that everybody has played but I somehow missed. In this series I will be doing absolutely no research on the games beforehand so as not to spoil my first run through. I will only be looking at popular games from 1997 to 2015, as I feel 2 years after a game's release isn't all that late to be playing for the first time, and 1997 is around the time I first started playing video games. So, here is everything I knew about Baldur's Gate before finishing the game. It's based on Dungeons & Dragons, it came out in the late 90s, and is apparently the best game ever. Before I even started, I was pretty excited. I felt a bit like an archaeologist rediscovering Tutankhamun's tomb for the first time. The soundtrack in the main menu sets the scene very well, and it definitely got me pumped. There's a short animation that sets up the mystery of the game, and then you're free to start the tutorial after creating your character. I have played tabletop D&D before, and so I thought it would be pretty cool to put one of my characters into the game. I created a half-elf bard named Kerrigan Stringer who would use his charms and quick wit to get out of any situation. I really liked the ability to use your own character portrait, as I feel it makes it far more personal than choosing one of the default ones. The numbers in character creation were never my strong point, so I essentially just tried to make sure everything was set to an even number and moved on. The tutorial itself took just over an hour, and while this does feel like a bit of a drag, the game has a lot to explain. The gameplay is quite complicated if you go into it, but I was content just to have a basic understanding of the things I would need all the time and just let the AI do the rest. I do feel as though the tutorial could have been spread out a little bit more, but I also understand that keeping the tutorial separate from the main game is easier on the designers. The first few scenes of the game are really good in terms of story. I'd leave a spoiler warning, but the game is nearly 20 years old, so keep up. You go to meet your foster father, who has an important message for you. He tells you to equip yourself for travel, and you can choose to do a few fetch quests or just leave right away. I'll just go now, I thought. Fetch quests are almost as bad as escort quests. You leave the walls of Candlekeep and set out to the Friendly Arm Inn to meet with your father's friends, but are set upon by a big bad dude on the way there. He wants to take you, and he kills your father while you flee. This leaves you confused and scared, but your childhood friend Imoen comes to console you. She has a pretty annoying voice and repeats the same few lines a lot, so I wasn't exactly thrilled to have her in my party. I failed to heed her advice and didn't search for the father's body, meaning I didn't really have much of an idea of what was going on with the story at this point. Travelling between different areas and exploring the separate maps is actually a lot of fun. I don't know if it's the little bit of OCD that everyone has, or if it's my need for things to be finished, but I loved revealing the whole map in an area. There are a few encounters that can happen when travelling between zones, just to spice things up a bit. These are always combat based, so get old pretty quickly, and honestly I could take them or leave them, but it does at least make the game feel more like the tabletop. On the subject of combat, I highly dislike the D&D combat. Whether in real D&D or in video games, I just hate it. Making the entire combat system chance-based makes things very frustrating. If I'm swinging my sword and can see it hit an enemy, but it tells me I missed, it can just do one. This made all of my encounters absolute life-and-death situations, which some would argue is good, but for a first-time player trying to get into the game, it's really off-putting. This led me to the decision that I would avoid combat at all costs and just try to talk my way through the game. Something I really liked about Baldur's Gate was how much it felt like a real RPG. There was so much you can do in terms of world interaction that being a video game actually doesn't confine it that much. I did struggle to talk my way out of most situations, but I was still happy with the amount of freedom that I had. There are a ton of side quests to do, but a lot of the beginning ones are just fetch quests or collect this much of X item quests, which I really have no time for. Throughout the game there are various assassination attempts that you have to deal with. These are pretty annoying as you either decimate the opponent or get completely wiped. There's no middle ground. This again goes back to chance-based combat and my total disdain for it. Another point about the combat is party members dying was an extremely regular occurrence, meaning I had no time or reason to try and connect with them. They were basically just disposable meat shields that occasionally stopped me from getting the game over screen. Baldur's Gate has partially voice-acted dialogue, meaning that it is much more manageable when you come across a wall of text. The voice acting is pretty darn good, even when compared to some games from today. When you look at the voice acting from a game like Resident Evil, the original I mean, it just doesn't compare. I think this is because Baldur's Gate was made by people who play D&D day in and day out, and are used to putting on voices for their groups. I'd like to make a couple of points about the mechanics and gameplay now. First of all, it's very difficult to get through doors. Due to the isometric view, it's quite hard to see doorways, especially if a building is facing the other way. Another thing that makes this difficult is if you misclick, your party then stands in the doorway and makes it nigh on impossible to click the exit without clicking on a party member instead. Secondly, managing your equipment is a real pain. However, I will say that the UI is extremely sophisticated for its time. Whilst the logistics of managing equipment might be a hassle, the game does everything it can to make this easier by having a very easy to follow UI layout. Finally, the isometric view felt very impersonal to me. It feels like I'm some sort of deity looking down on my subjects rather than being immersed in the character I created. I think I would have preferred if the camera were more like RuneScape's, where you have the freedom to rotate and zoom in, but I do understand that this game was made in 1998, so 2.5D was about as good as it got. So I'd managed to struggle my way to the mines of Nashgal, and this is where I hit a wall. There were numerous groups of kobolds in the mines, and my party and I would destroy all but one of them, but then the dice rolls would go against us, and that one 3-foot-tall goblin thing would kill the whole party. This was where I started to get really aggravated by the combat. Rather than give up, I thought I would instead start again and choose a different class with more health and damage output. When I was in the character creation this time, I noticed something that had got past me before, an option called Story Mode. This option gives you all the advantages of being on easy, but your characters cannot die in combat. Perfect, I thought. Now I can actually play and not worry about the only part of the game I hate. So I set out once more, this time as Tolgan Bogram, another character I played in tabletop D&D. I flew through the first few parts and got back to the mines in no time. This time my only obstacle was the layout of the mine. Story mode is a brilliant addition for people like me. It makes your party invincible and, funnily enough, means you can focus on the story. This was an absolute godsend, as I was ready to give up on Baldur's Gate and I honestly hadn't been having that much fun. Now I wanted to talk to all of the characters, get to know them and find out what made them the way they are. Exploring dungeons in this game is great fun, which it should be, as its predecessor is called Dungeons and Dragons. When you finish the Nashgal mines, you find out that there is a plot to create an iron shortage, and you decide that you're going to stop this as it may lead you to your true heritage. It seems fairly simple, but the plot does have some good twists and turns. I was having a lot more fun now that I was on story mode. Combat was now just a nuisance, and my party members weren't dropping like flies. I'm glad I discovered this setting, as I don't think I would have finished the game without it. One thing I really messed up was multiclassing. I didn't understand it enough to go into it, and what I ended up doing was multiclassing Imoen into a mage and essentially made her completely useless. But I had grown to like the girl, so kept her around for the duration of the game. Unfortunately, once I started the process I couldn't back out of it. This was a problem that possibly could have been resolved in development, but on the other hand, a lot of people that play this game actually do know what they're doing, so swings and roundabouts I guess. Now that death was no longer a looming threat, I felt much more of an incentive to explore the land. I found a few nice places in Cloakwood and even started doing a few side quests. There was one in particular that I really enjoyed, but more on that later. Next was the raid on the bandit camp. This was actually a lot of fun, as finding the camp is half the challenge. In order to unlock new areas on the map, you have to go to specific places to make sure you're close enough. Sometimes you have to be told where that place is, but you still have to go from point to point to get near enough to it in the first place. Although it's a bit long-winded, I do really like it. So, the bandit camp. You find out that the Nashgal mines and the bandits stealing the iron were both basically distractions, as there was a bigger mine hidden somewhere in Cloakwood. And that's all the direction you're given. Go to Cloakwood and find the mines. It took me a good 45 minutes to find the mines, and I was just about to look for a guide when I stumbled upon it. On my way through Cloakwood, I was offered a few new party members, and some of them did have interesting sounding quests, but I liked the party I had, so stuck with them. This did, however, give me incentive to play again at a later date so I could do those quests. Anyway, Cloakwood Mine was much the same as Nashville, but a lot bigger. I spoke to a few of the slaves, and one of them told me that there was a plug holding back a lake, and if I were to find the key I could open it and flood the mine. Interesting. Further into the mine, the leader of the slaves asked that I warn the others if I chose to flood the mine, so that they could get out. The boss fight toward the end of this mine gave me a newfound appreciation for isometric games, even to the point where I may well consider playing Diablo in future. I managed to get the key to the plug, warned the slaves, and destroyed the mine, ensuring no one else would be able to use it for the foreseeable future. This whole questline was extremely satisfying, and it was the defining point where I truly got into Baldur's Gate. Even the combat had begun to satisfy me. Even though I couldn't die, it still felt good to overcome a tough enemy. I moved on to help one of my party members with their questline. Nira is a wild mage and wants to learn how to control her magic, so we set about finding an elderly wild mage who could possibly help her. I did this partly for the story, but mostly to get a piece of that 8-bit booty.
Almost there now. Watch out for falling rocks. Grub got smooshed the other day. We rescue him, but he just grubbed now. Hey, maybe we feed Grub to Bear and Bear not get angry.
There's a goblin camp that he's being held in, and I actually managed to talk my way into seeing him. Getting a little tour of the goblin's camp was pretty cool, and the voice acting on the goblin was amusing. Then, when you get to the cave at the end, the other goblins say,
"That moron let intruders in again!"
Best joke in gaming by far. I loved all of the dialogue in this quest, as it shows that Baldur's Gate doesn't always need to be serious. When you finally speak to the wild mage, he essentially tells Nira to deal with it, and gives her a belt that will stop her from accidentally polymorphing herself. She isn't satisfied with the conclusion, but does show a little more interest in you for helping her. Next I needed to go to Baldur's Gate. Finally, I was going to set foot in the city the game was named for, but then I hit an obstacle. I couldn't find my way there. It took hours of exploring, thousands of lines of NPC conversation, and hundreds of hours of research into the world's geography. But I eventually found a guide online that told me exactly where to go. Thankfully I had enough of a reputation to just be let in, so I didn't have to do the side quest to be smuggled in. I decided I would help out the Flaming Fist mercenaries here. Their leader, Scar, gave me a quest to investigate the Seven Suns building. When I got there, I found out it had been taken over by doppelgangers. Clearly they needed to be wiped out. I did my duty and killed them all. Scar was happy with this and gave me another quest to investigate some disappearances. He gave me a lead in the sewers, and so I went straight there. Now, I don't know if I just got lucky with the sewer grate I chose, or if they all lead there, but I found the ogre who was kidnapping people immediately. Needless to say, he was taking a dirt nap in no time, and Scar gave me a hefty reward. Before moving on with the main quest, I wanted to finish off a few side quests I had picked up. I returned a farmer's dead son to him, helped a little girl get her magic bowl back, and then started one of the greatest side quests I have ever played in any game, ever. But before I get into that, let me tell you about a little moral dilemma I had. There was a group of fishermen who claimed a witch was using magic to make the seas more violent whenever they went out, and they asked me to find and kill this witch. Okay, I'm not above a little bounty hunting, I thought. I went to find this witch, but all I found in her stead was a young girl. She told me she wanted nothing to do with me or the fishermen. I said I only wanted a peaceful solution to the problem, and she attacked. After subduing her, she told me the fisherman had killed her mother and stolen her offering bowl. Her mother's spirit was restless and wanted revenge on the fisherman. At this point I thought both sides were pulling a fast one, so when I told the girl I didn't believe either of them, she attacked again. This time I killed her. I killed a child. A living, breathing, digitally rendered child. And I felt awful. How could I have committed such a despicable crime? I couldn't live with myself. Or rather, Tolgan couldn't, so I reloaded, and this time I told the girl I would retrieve her bowl. I went back to the fishermen and threatened to hurt them if they refused. They promised they wouldn't take any more from the seas and agreed to give the bowl back. The dilemma was over, and no bad stuff ever happened. You can't prove a thing. Okay, here's what you've been waiting so patiently for. The best side quest I have ever played. Probably. I was approached by a man in the street selling tours of a cursed tower. This was intriguing. I thought he may be a grifter, but the possible reward was worth the risk. I paid his excessive fee and followed him to Durlag's tower. There were a few other tourists already here, and the guide warned of traps in the tower, but everything seemed quiet. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, a black armour-clad figure appeared in the centre of a room. A fireball flew from his hand, killing one of the tourists. Everyone panicked, but my party was unshaken. It was time to go to work. Up to the tower we ascended, eventually coming across some literature telling of a labyrinth in the bowels of the accursed tower, so down we went. When we found the first level of the labyrinth, we realised this was more than just a maze. As we explored the rooms, there were echoes of distant stone doors opening and closing. Amongst the ruins were ward stones. What their purpose was not known to us, but they seemed to activate certain doors and contraptions throughout the maze. Eventually we made it down to level 2. 4 spirits stood before us and gave us 4 riddles. When we set our minds to each one, we were able to solve the puzzles with relative ease. The spirits then attacked us. When they fell, they gave way to the final level of the labyrinth. On level 3 there were 4 rooms, each with different kind of enemy to slay and each with a specific way to be slain. After completing all 4 rooms, we were sent to some kind of alternate dimension to be questioned once more by the golems that stood guard over these halls. They told us the history of Durlag, giving us insight into what had caused the curse. After passing their tests, there was only Durlag himself left to face. He realised that we understood him, and he departed to whatever world comes next. Now reascending to the top of the tower, that armoured figure appeared once more. He had slain the other adventurers that had come before us, and stated that he had outlived dragons and elves. It mattered not, he fell all the same. As I exited the tower, I thought to myself, my god, that was incredible. I haven't seen writing like this for a side quest since The Witcher 3. There was so much detail, so many puzzles to be solved, and so many different ways to play it. Sure, the tight corridors were difficult to navigate, and the darkness made it hard to see items that were dropped on the floor, but the gameplay's downsides were nothing compared to the experience I had throughout the tower. I definitely played that experience up a bit, and it didn't happen exactly like that, but the game offers enough open-endedness that you can make your own adventure. The real reason I went to the tower was to retrieve a dagger that a dwarf had lost years ago. When I retrieved the dagger, a cultist robbed me of it. The dwarf knew this would happen, and told me the cult wanted to resurrect the demon that had been held within the dagger. This was very D&D, and I loved it. Of course I went to stop the cult, and it was the most fun I had had with this game so far. I did a little more exploring before starting the next main quest. I found some new quests, got some good loot, and got a little sugar from Nera. The next few quests are really interesting. Scar asks you to investigate the Iron Throne headquarters. You then find out that the man who killed your father has been running the whole operation and caused the iron shortage. You also find out that he is your brother, and both you and him hold the essence of the god of murder within you, which is apparently what has been driving you to kill enemies and why you go stronger when they die. During your time hunting this man, Scar is killed, and the Duke who runs the Flaming Fists is taken ill. You end up imprisoned by the new Flaming Fists leader and have to form a short allegiance with a child murderer, the worst kind of scum, in order to get out. I later found out that you can have the new leader's daughter in your party, and he lets you go if he sees her. Again, this works in the game's favour, giving you more ways to complete your quests. Before going back to the Duke with the evidence against Savarok, I realised I had completely forgotten to actually pick the evidence up. This meant I had to Benny Hill away from the Flaming Fists so that I wouldn't lose reputation by killing them. I made it back to the Iron Throne, then made it back to the Duke again. He was being held in the Flaming Fists headquarters, so I had to storm the gates. Thankfully this didn't lose me any rep. When I made it back to the Duke's bedside, he was being tended to by a healer who said he had very little time left. After a short conversation with the healer, he revealed himself to be a doppelganger. Needless to say, it didn't end well for the doppelganger. I escorted the Duke to his last safe place, the Harbour Master's building in the city's docks. Once he was safe, I was free to confront my brother Savarok and stop him being crowned Duke. All that I have just described kept the final hours of Baldur's Gate at a very high pace. Although this all took place over the span of around 2.5 hours, it felt like mere minutes. I loved the real sense of urgency the game places on you. It really does feel like time is against you. The closing moments of Baldur's Gate are really great. You have to track down Savarok through the Thieves' Guild mazes, and then confront him in the ruins of the city Baldur's Gate was built on. He has some dialogue about how the two of you are brothers, and he needed to eliminate the competition. I tried to convince him to join me and fight the evil within him, but he refused. It did make me wonder whether he would be able to be convinced if I had maybe done some more side quests. Hang on, let me see. Nope, doesn't look like you can. Shame. The final cutscene has no dialogue, just a series of images showing the statue of Baal, the murder god, crumbling, while Saravok's essence is dissipated. I actually quite liked this as it left a lot of mystery, but also gave you the satisfaction of getting revenge on the guy that killed your father. My only problem with the ending is this. When chasing Savarok through the Thieves' Guild, you have to go through a pretty huge maze. Savarok seems to breeze right through it, but no one there has ever seen him before, so how does he know it so well? I think I'm just being pedantic, but it just feels a bit odd. One feature of the game is something I was pretty keen to try: multiplayer. Nothing much changes though. The story is the same and you have to make all 6 party members before you can play. I imagine this would be a lot more fun with 6 players, all trying to beat the game on hard, but they would really have to know what they're doing. Unfortunately, that just isn't me, so I can't really take advantage of the multiplayer. I was surprised to see a high number of people playing multiplayer. I would assume servers are still being run through Steam and Good Old Games, or the devs are actually still running them, and if they are, kudos to them. The multiplayer menu and lobbies are actually all really intuitive for a game that is almost 2 decades old, but I'm not sure if this is them in their original state or if the game is still being updated and patched. As with a lot of older games, Baldur's Gate lacks a lot of solid direction. It can be difficult figuring out what you need to do to trigger the next event in the chain to complete your current objective. This was super common in the late 90s and early 2000s, as games were made to make you think more. I do quite like this style of narrative, but I was thankful that I had the internet to back me up if I needed it. The moral system in this game was a little off too. It couldn't seem to decide what was considered good or bad. This was especially apparent when I was being hunted by the Flaming Fists, as it was considered bad to kill them in self-defense in the street, but good to kill them at their base whilst I was on the attack. During my first attempt, almost all of my party left me for being too evil, and I had to reload in order to try again. Just a quick side note I thought I'd add in. A weird bug I encountered while playing was every time I closed the game it would crash. It's not a massive problem as I'm already closing the game, but worth mentioning all the same. Throughout my playthrough, I found that my experience with tabletop D&D did come in handy. I wouldn't say it was a prerequisite for playing Baldur's Gate, but it certainly doesn't hurt to have a basic understanding of the world and rules. I do feel, however, that Baldur's Gate was a little lost on me. If I understood D&D more, I think that I would have enjoyed the game a lot more. As with all role-playing games though, you get out of it what you put in. I would definitely recommend story mode for first-time players, or returning players who aren't overly familiar with dice-based combat. The story of Baldur's Gate is solid throughout the game, and a lot of the side quests only serve to reinforce it. The game allows you to roleplay to a far greater extent than any video game I have ever played, and yes, I am including the Elder Scrolls games. Even if you don't fancy the isometric 2.5D effects, I would highly recommend you give it a try, as it is definitely what made me think twice about the genre. So, the big question that this whole video has been leading up to: is Baldur's Gate worth the hype? In short, yes. In long, please hit the replay button. Baldur's Gate is unique in that it is a game that the industry has completely surpassed but hasn't left behind. It could probably be remade in Flash and could run at a higher graphical standard in today's browsers, but it's worth more than that. It sets a very high standard that some games, even 20 years later, can only dream of reaching. For that reason, I would say that Baldur's Gate fully deserves its reputation and is a game I will return to in future. Baldur's Gate may not be perfect, but it is pretty damn good.